Welcome to the Empathy Stories channel, where we share tales of compassion, transformation, and the profound connections that change lives. Today, we bring you a heartwarming story about Sarah, a diner owner struggling to keep her business afloat, and how one simple act of kindness altered the course of her life forever. In a quiet neighborhood, tucked between a series of brightly lit stores and tall buildings, sat a small, humble diner. The walls of Sarah's diner had seen years of laughter, complaints, and the hum of a daily routine. But recently, the diner had felt emptier than ever before. The rain had been relentless for days, casting a dull grayness over the city streets. Sarah sat at the counter, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. The weight of her worries was reflected in the deep lines of her face. She glanced over the bills that were scattered across the counter: unpaid rent, overdue supplies, and utility bills that seemed to multiply by the day. The diner was small. Only a few booths and a counter where regulars used to chat about their lives. A place that had always felt like a second home to Sarah. But lately, the empty tables seemed to mock her hard work. Her dream of keeping the diner afloat, of making it a place where people could escape the hustle of life, was slipping through her fingers. Every day, she tried to stay positive, to keep pushing forward. But tonight felt different. The weather forecast had warned of rain. And as always, rainy days meant fewer customers. Sarah knew that the money from tonight's dinner service wouldn't be enough to pay for next month's rent, let alone the cost of food for her children. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the diner's doorbell jingling. She looked up and saw a man standing at the door, soaked from the rain, his clothes clinging to his thin frame. His eyes, deep and tired, scanned the diner. And for a moment, Sarah thought he might leave. But then he hesitated and walked slowly inside. He was an elderly man. And as he stepped inside, water dripped from his clothes and pooled at his feet. His face was weathered, his hands shaky, and there was something in his demeanor that made Sarah's heart ache. She saw the hunger in his eyes. And despite her own financial struggles, she knew she couldn't turn him away. "Hi there," as she greeted him with a warm, welcoming smile. "Take a seat, and I'll get you something warm to eat." The man looked at her, his eyes filled with embarrassment. "I don't have any money. I just need a warm place to sit for a moment." Sarah's heart softened. She couldn't help but remember her own struggles when she first came to this country. Her hands trembling as she counted every penny just to feed her children. "Don't worry about the money," she said gently. "Come on. Sit down. I'll get you something hot to eat." She led him to a corner table and handed him a towel to dry off. As she made her way to the kitchen, Sarah's mind raced. There was no reason she should be giving away food for free, especially with her bills piling up. But she couldn't ignore the desperate look in the man's eyes. She thought about how hard it had been for her, how long she had gone without when she first arrived here, and how small acts of kindness had kept her going. She had always been taught that sharing what little you had was a gift in itself, something that would always come back to you. In the kitchen, Sarah started preparing the soup she had always made with her grandmother's recipe, a chicken soup that had been passed down through generations. As she chopped vegetables and seasoned the broth, the comforting smell of the soup filled the kitchen. She baked fresh bread, knowing that the warm food would give the man more than just sustenance. It would show him that he wasn't invisible, that he mattered. As she worked, Sarah found herself thinking about her father, who had passed away 10 years ago. She wondered if he had ever gone hungry, if he had ever felt the kind of loneliness that came from losing everything. She thought about her children, Tommy, who was 12, and Sophia, who was 9, and how they depended on her. How they had always been her motivation to push forward. She could see their faces in her mind. Bright and eager for life. Always full of hope. Even in the darkest of times. Once the soup was ready, Sarah carefully ladled it into a bowl, adding a generous portion of bread on the side. She also packed a bag with extra bread and cookies, just in case tomorrow would be another hungry day for this man. She didn't want him to feel ashamed or uncomfortable for accepting her help. So she added a little extra to the meal, as she would for her own family. She knew how hard it was to ask for help, to admit that you were in need. But this was a small thing she could do, a gift of warmth, compassion, and dignity. When Sarah returned to the table, she served the man the meal with the care and attention she would give to her own father. The man looked up at her in surprise. His eyes filled with gratitude as he took the first spoonful of soup. A tear slid down his cheek. "This reminds me of my mother's cooking," he said softly. "She used to make this for me when I was a child." As he continued to eat, he shared stories of his youth, his family, and his memories of better days. Sarah listened intently, her heart aching for him. The diner, which had been quiet and empty just moments ago, now felt full with their shared stories. Sarah knew that, for this moment, this was the most important thing she could do: be present, listen, and offer compassion without expectation. When the man finished his meal, he smiled at her, his eyes brighter than when he had entered. He thanked her repeatedly and, despite her insistence, left her a small folded note on the table before he left. Sarah didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was just a thank you note. But when she unfolded the paper, her hands began to tremble. What she found would change everything. The rain had subsided by the time George left the diner. His step slower now, but lighter than when he had entered. Sarah watched him walk into the night, her mind still lingering on the brief but meaningful conversation they had shared. She cleaned up the table where he had sat, running a cloth over the remnants of the meal. Lost in thought, her eyes landed on the folded note he had left behind. It was a simple gesture, and she initially thought it was just a thank you note, something to be polite. But when she opened it, her hand shook as she read the carefully written words. The note was short, but it was powerful. "Dear Sarah, what you did for me tonight reminded me of the kindness that still exists in this world. I haven't felt this much compassion in years, and I want to repay you somehow. I've been watching your diner for a while now. Your food is wonderful, and you treat your customers with the care of a family member. I see potential in your business, and I want to help. I have connections in the industry, and I can bring in investors who will ensure your restaurant thrives. They'll be here soon, and I will vouch for you personally. Thank you for everything, and please believe that I'm here to help. George." Sarah stared at the note, her heart pounding. She read it over again, not quite able to believe what she was seeing. George wasn't just a simple, hungry man who had wandered into her diner on a rainy evening. He was someone with connections. Someone who had been watching her diner, and her struggle. The realization sank in slowly. This wasn't just kindness, this was an opportunity that could change her life, her children's lives, and the future of her diner. The thought of investors coming to her small, struggling diner felt surreal. She had always hoped for something like this, but never in her wildest dreams did she think it would come from someone like George, the elderly man she had served out of compassion. He had walked in, barely able to afford a meal, but he was now offering to bring in investors who could transform her entire business. For the rest of the night, Sarah couldn't focus on the chores she had left to do. Her mind was racing. Her emotions a whirlwind. What if it was a scam? What if he had some hidden agenda? But as she thought back on their brief interaction, she couldn't ignore the sincerity in his eyes, the gratitude in his voice when he had thanked her. No, she decided. She would trust him. She had nothing left to lose, and everything to gain. The next morning, Sarah opened the diner early, the early morning light filtering through the window as she swept the floors and prepped for the day. Her heart was still fluttering from the note, and she couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the break she had been waiting for. As the hours passed, Sarah's anticipation grew. She couldn't stop herself from glancing at the door every time it opened. The minutes dragged on as if mocking her. But when the bell above the door rang just before lunchtime, she froze. A group of well-dressed individuals entered, all wearing sharp suits. And George was with them, looking completely different. No longer the frail, wet man who had come in the night before. He was now standing tall, exuding confidence and authority. The men and women who accompanied him sat at several tables, and Sarah could hear them discussing the menu, tasting the food. She could feel her nerves creeping in as she prepared each dish with care, trying to focus on what she was doing instead of the whirlwind of emotions inside her. George, smiling warmly, walked over to Sarah at the counter. "You've done a wonderful job with this place," he said, his voice full of praise. "Your food has heart, and that's something you can't fake." "Thank you," Sarah said, her voice shaky. "I'm glad you like it." As the investors ate, George showed them around the diner, explaining the potential he saw in the small restaurant. "This place has something that no fancy restaurant can replicate," George said, his voice full of conviction. "It's not just about the food. It's about the way Sarah treats everyone who walks through the door. She makes them feel like family." As the meeting continued, Sarah found herself caught between excitement and disbelief. Investors were seriously interested in her diner. They were making plans to help her expand. And all she had to do was keep doing what she had always done, make delicious food and treat people with kindness. It seemed too good to be true. Finally, after what felt like hours, the investors approached Sarah. One of them, a woman with a warm smile, spoke first. "We'd like to offer you an investment deal. We'll help you grow, but we want to make sure you stay true to what makes this place special. You'll get the funding to open 5 more locations. But your values, your focus on treating people like family, will always be the heart of this business." Sarah's hands trembled as she shook the woman's hand. The reality of it all was still sinking in. They wanted to help her. They wanted her diner to grow. But they understood that her values were what made it unique. She could feel tears welling up in her eyes. She had spent so many sleepless nights worrying, wondering how she would make ends meet. And now, in one day, everything was changing. As the investors left the diner, George stayed behind. He looked at Sarah with a knowing smile. "You did it," he said. "You showed them that it's not just about money or fancy restaurants. It's about heart. And that's why I believe in you." Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude towards George. He had not only given her a chance to fulfill her dream but had also reminded her of the power of kindness, the kindness she had shown him when he needed it the most. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a new chapter in her life. A chapter that would change not just her diner, but her entire outlook on what it meant to help others and to receive help in return. The weeks following the visit from George and the investors were nothing short of a whirlwind. Sarah had always run her small diner with love. But now she was tasked with turning it into something bigger, a dream she had only dared to imagine in fleeting moments of hope. The expansion was happening fast. faster than she ever thought possible. The diner she had once fought so hard to keep afloat was now in the process of growing into 5 new locations. At first, the changes felt overwhelming. Sarah spent long days at the original diner, coordinating with contractors, hiring new staff, and making sure everything was in order. The investors were true to their word. They didn't want to change what made her diner special, only to help it grow. The checkered curtains remained in every new location, and the family-style seating was kept the same. The menu, with its hearty dishes and comforting flavors, stayed unchanged. The biggest change was the additional help. No longer was Sarah working alone, juggling all the responsibilities of cooking, serving, and managing. With the new staff came new challenges, but also new energy. The restaurant buzzed with activity. The once silent hours of the day now filled with customers eager to experience the warmth Sarah had always tried to create. She trained each cook personally, ensuring they understood that the most important ingredient wasn't the food itself, it was the love and care that went into every dish. But even with the excitement of growth, Sarah never lost sight of her core values. She made sure her staff knew that every customer who walked through the door was a guest, not just someone to serve. She insisted that they treat everyone like family, just as she always had, and just as she had promised George. She hired people who needed help, offering jobs to single parents, students, and those struggling to make ends meet. Maria's life had transformed in ways she couldn't have imagined a year ago. She moved her family into a better apartment, closer to her children's school. Her son, Tommy, and daughter, Sophia, were proud of their mother. On weekends, they helped out at the diner, learning the recipes just as Maria had learned them from her grandmother. There were still struggles, of course, but now there was a sense of stability. The weight of constant worry had been replaced by a quiet confidence. One evening, a year after the new locations had opened, Sarah sat at the counter of the original diner, watching the familiar bustle of customers coming and going. George had stopped by earlier for his usual bowl of her grandmother's chicken soup. She had noticed the same quiet smile he had worn on that first rainy night when he walked into her diner. As she wiped down the counter, a feeling of peace settled over her. The road hadn't been easy, and there had been many sleepless nights. But now, she could look back and see the incredible transformation, not just of her business, but of her own life. The diner had become a place where people came not only for the food, but for the warmth that Sarah had always given. It had become a sanctuary for those who needed a little kindness, a little warmth in a cold world. Sarah had learned so much in the process. She had learned that help often comes when you least expect it, and that kindness can ripple through the lives of others in ways that are far-reaching. She had also learned the importance of resilience, not just in the face of adversity, but in the willingness to trust again, to open herself up to new opportunities, and to give others the chance to show what they could do. In the quiet moments, when the last of the customers had left for the evening, Sarah would think about George. He had never asked for anything in return for his help. He had simply seen her struggle and offered a lifeline, one that would ultimately change the course of her life. As she closed the diner for the night, she stood in front of the framed note he had left her, now hanging proudly in the office. A constant reminder that kindness truly does have the power to change lives. As the new locations continued to grow, Sarah's diner became more than just a business. It became a symbol of what can happen when you offer someone not just a meal, but dignity and respect. And she knew, deep in her heart, that she would never forget the power of that rainy night and the man who had walked into her diner, hungry and broken, and left her with a new lease on life. The expansion was only the beginning, and Sarah had never been more ready for what lay ahead. The journey had taught her that no matter how small or insignificant a gesture may seem, it could turn into something life-changing. And as long as she stayed true to the heart of what made her diner special, the future would always be filled with hope. Thank you for watching this inspiring journey of hope and resilience. Sarah's story reminds us that kindness, no matter how small, can have a life-changing impact. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to the Empathy Stories channel for more uplifting tales. Keep spreading kindness wherever you go.